The world was a universe of polished marble and cold indifference, and Arya was its smallest, most invisible moon. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't scrub away the feeling of being a ghost. Her reflection warped in the gleaming floor was a constant reminder, a smudge to be wiped away. The scent of lemon polish and bleach was the only perfume she ever wore, a chemical shroud that announced her purpose before she ever spoke a word. Tonight, it felt particularly suffocating. From the grand hall, the sounds of the Blackwood pack, laughter like rolling thunder, arguments that cracked like lightning, spilled into the corridors she was tasked to keep spotless. They were sounds of a life she orbited, but could never touch. Moments later, a new sound cut through the din. The sharp, confident click of heels. Seraphina. Of course. She was the Alpha's top enforcer, a she-wolf carved from ice and ambition, and she never missed an opportunity to remind Arya of her place. She didn't walk with one wolf, but three, her personal court of whispers and sneers. "Oh, look!" Seraphina's voice dripped with a sweet poison that always found its mark. "The little mouse is still here. I thought you'd have scurried back to your hole by now, cleaner." Her companions snickered, the sound ugly and sharp in the echoing hall. Arya kept her eyes down, her knuckles white on the handle of her mop. She had to keep her head down because looking up meant meeting their pity, or worse, their contempt, and she wasn't sure which was more painful. Deep down, she knew the truth. They didn't see her as a person. They saw her as a function, a pair of hands. "The Harvest Moon Festival is tomorrow night," another she-wolf, Lyra, added, examining her perfect nails. "The Alpha will be choosing his personal guard for the coming year. I hear the trials will be brutal." Seraphina's smile was a predatory slash of red lipstick. "He needs the strongest, especially now." She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. With the rumors from the Nightshade pack getting worse, Arya's ears perked up. Nightshade. She'd heard whispers, fragments of conversations she wasn't meant to catch. A rival pack, an alpha named Gideon who was wrong, unhinged. But then, Seraphina's cold eyes landed on her again. "What are you listening to, little mouse? This is pack business, not for human ears." Just like that, the walls slammed back down. Human, orphan, cleaner. The labels were her cage. Without another word, they swept past, their laughter trailing behind them like a cruel perfume, leaving Arya alone in the sudden, ringing silence. Her chest ached. She finished her work, her movements automatic, her mind a million miles away. Before she left the hall, she caught her reflection one last time in a tall, polished window pane. For a breath, a heartbeat, her eyes weren't just brown. They shone, impossibly, like polished silver under the moonlight. She blinked, and the illusion was gone. Just a tired, lonely girl staring back. That night, the walls of her tiny room in the servants' wing felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. The silver-eyed girl in the window haunted her. It had to be a trick of the light. Right? What other explanation was there? She pushed the thought away, because dwelling on the impossible was a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she knelt, prying up a loose floorboard. Beneath it lay her only real hope, a worn, folded travel brochure and a small, cloth-wrapped bundle of cash. The brochure was for a place called Port Blossom, a tiny coastal town thousands of miles away. A place with no werewolves, no packs, no alphas. A place where nobody would know her as the orphan cleaner. She remembered the day she found the brochure discarded by a visiting pack member. A little girl, no older than 6, had pointed at her and asked her mother, "Why doesn't the orphan cleaner have a mommy?" The mother had shushed the child, but the name stuck, a brand on her soul. That was the day her dream of escape was born. Truth be told, it was a fragile dream, built on hoarded tips and scrimped wages. But it was hers. It was the only thing that was. She counted the money again. Not enough. Not yet. But soon. So soon. Would a place like that even want someone like her? The question was a constant, nagging whisper in the back of her mind. Maybe it was fate that she would always be on the outside looking in. A soft knock came at her door. It was Alara, a kind, elderly Omega who managed the household staff. Her face, usually gentle, was etched with a quiet sympathy. "Arya, child," she said, handing her a neatly folded set of linens. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right. Serafina can be sharp." Arya just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Alara sighed, her gaze softening. "Tomorrow is a big day. The festival and... It's your 18th birthday, isn't it?" Arya nodded again. She'd been trying not to think about it. Birthdays were just another day of work. "It's a significant day," Alara continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "A day of change for those with pack blood. Even if you are human, the moon has its own magic." The old wolf's eyes held a strange, knowing glint that Arya couldn't decipher. "Be careful tomorrow night." The warning, meant to be kind, sent a shiver of pure dread down Arya's spine. She didn't know what scared her more: the thought of Serafina's cruelty, or the strange, unexplainable feeling that Alara's words were a prophecy. Something was coming. Something was about to break. And she had a terrible feeling it was her. The Harvest Moon Festival was a raw, primal thing, a symphony of senses that clawed at Arya's composure. The air, thick with the smell of roasting meat and pine sap from the roaring bonfire, vibrated with the deep, rhythmic beat of ceremonial drums. It was a pulse that resonated not in her ears but deep in her bones. Shadows danced between the towering figures of the pack wolves, their laughter loud and unrestrained, their eyes glowing with feral light. And she was in the middle of it all, a fragile bird in a den of lions tasked with serving drinks and staying invisible. More importantly, he was here. Alpha Jax Blackwood. He moved through the crowd like a living storm, a gravitational force that pulled all attention toward him without a single word. He was power incarnate, broad-shouldered with hair as black as a moonless night, and eyes that seemed to hold the cold fire of distant stars. She felt the weight of his presence even when his back was to her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady pulse of the festival. Then, it started. A low hum. At first, she thought it was the drums, but then she realized it was inside her. A vibration in her blood, a strange, forgotten melody waking up after a long, long sleep. Her skin tingled. The scents in the air became impossibly sharp, the sounds deafeningly clear. As if the world narrowed, her focus zeroed in on the alpha. As if pulled by a string, her head turned, and for the first time, his gaze swept across the crowd and landed, directly on her. The moment their eyes locked, her world tilted. His golden eyes widened, not with anger or dismissal, but with something else. Shock, recognition. Her breath caught. The hum inside her roared into a crescendo, a silent scream of power and pain and something else. Something that felt like coming home. Without warning, a pain so sharp, so blinding, it stole the air from her lungs, lanced through her entire body. A fire bloomed beneath her skin. The tray of glasses slipped from her numb fingers. Crash! The world snapped back into focus with the sound of shattering glass. The drumming stopped. The laughter died. Silence, absolute, deafening silence, fell over the clearing. 100 pairs of eyes, predator eyes, were on her. And worst of all, his. His gaze wasn't just looking at her anymore. It was burning through her, seeing something deep inside her she never even knew existed. And in his eyes, she saw a terrifying, impossible truth. He saw her. For the first time in her life, she was utterly, completely seen. And it was the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to her. In the span of a breath, the universe of noise and chaos that was the festival collapsed into a single sharp point of silence. Her world tilted. The only thing that existed was the impossible, terrifying weight of his stare. Alpha Jax Blackwood. He wasn't looking at the clumsy cleaner who'd dropped a tray. No. He was looking at her. His golden eyes, not just gold, but molten fire, burned with an intensity that stripped her bare, seeing past the worn servant's dress, past the years of grime and invisibility, and into the very marrow of her bones. Her soul answered, a tremor that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. Before she could move, before she could even think to run, he was there. He didn't walk. He simply crossed the space between them, a blur of predatory grace that the human eye could barely follow. The air thickened, charged with a power that made the hair on her arms stand on end. With his scent in the air, a wild, intoxicating mix of pine, earth, and something uniquely, powerfully male, her thoughts spun into nothing. Her instincts surged. He stopped just before her, a mountain of muscle and authority. He inhaled, a deep, shuddering breath, and his eyes closed for a moment. When they opened, they were blazing, and a low, guttural sound rumbled in his chest. It wasn't a word. It was a claim, a statement of fact as old as the moon itself. And just like that, everything changed. He leaned in, his voice a low vibration that vibrated right through her. Mine! The word wasn't shouted. It was a possessive, visceral growl that ripped through the silence and slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. Her knees buckled. Whispers erupted around them like wildfire, a wave of shock and disbelief. Her own panic was a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. Mine? What did he mean, mine? This had to be a mistake, a cruel, humiliating joke. Without thinking, her body moved on instinct, stumbling backward, trying to put space between them. But then his hand shot out, his fingers wrapping gently but firmly around her arm. The contact was electric. A jolt of pure, unadulterated energy shot up her arm and straight to her core, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. Her wolf, the creature she never knew existed, pressed forward, and she let it happen. No! She trembled, the word barely a whisper. He ignored her completely. His gaze lifted, sweeping over the stunned faces of his pack, his expression one of absolute, unchallengeable command. He started leading her away from the bonfire, away from the shattered glass and the hundreds of staring eyes. As he pulled her through the crowd, she caught a glimpse of Seraphina's face. It wasn't just shock. It was a mask of pure, venomous hatred. The look in the she-wolf's eyes promised a pain far worse than any shattered glass. And because of that, Arya knew this wasn't just a mistake. It was a death sentence. The heavy oak door of the Alpha's study slammed shut, the sound cutting them off from the rest of the world. The silence that followed was somehow louder and more terrifying than the chaos of the festival. This was a room she knew intimately. The scent of old leather and wood smoke, the way the moonlight fell across the massive desk she polished every other day. But she had only ever been a ghost in here. Now, she was its prisoner. She ripped her arm from his grasp, stumbling back until her legs hit the edge of a leather armchair. What was that? What are you doing? Her voice trembled, a pathetic squeak against the force of his presence. Jax turned, his body language screaming a mix of barely leashed power and something else. Something she couldn't name. Confusion? Awe? What you felt, he began, his voice a low rumble. The energy, the connection. I felt it too. It's the mate bond, Arya. She stared at him, her mind refusing to process the words. The what? That's impossible. I'm human. The last word came out as a desperate plea. A sad, humorless smile touched his lips. No, you're not. He took a step closer and she flinched. You never were. Your wolf blood was just dormant, latent. Tonight, on your 18th birthday, under the harvest moon, it woke up. It had to be a mistake, because she was nobody, the orphan, the cleaner, a piece of furniture in their grand lives. No, you're wrong. I've lived here my whole life. If I were one of you, I'd have known. She fought him on it, because to accept his words meant her entire life, her entire understanding of herself, was a lie. To be a wolf, to be a mate, and his mate of all people, was a fantasy too cruel to even consider. What's worse, a tiny, treacherous part of her wanted it to be true. Your scent has changed, he said, his voice dropping, becoming softer, more intense. Before, you smelled of lemon polish and loneliness. Now, he took another step, his nostrils flaring slightly. Now, you smell of moonlight and wild jasmine. You smell like mine. Stop saying that, she cried, wrapping her arms around herself. I am not yours. I am not anything. Look at me, Arya, he commanded, his voice gentle but firm. Look at what you are. In the echo of his voice, she saw it, her reflection captured in the glass of the tall bookshelf behind him. Her face was pale, her expression terrified. But her eyes, her breath caught. Her eyes, they weren't brown, not anymore. They were a luminous, impossible, undeniable silver. The same silver she'd seen in the window earlier, only now it was real, and it was radiant, and it was staring back at her with the soul of a wolf. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a cold, hollow dread. The silver eyes, the hum in her blood, the way he looked at her. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a mistake. It was the truth. And just like that, the floor fell out from beneath her world. Moments later, the study door opened again. This time it wasn't Escape that entered, but two of the pack's oldest elders, their faces grim and etched with the weight of centuries. Alara was one of them. Her earlier warning now made a terrifying kind of sense. They looked at Arya not as a servant, but as a living, breathing miracle, and a catastrophic problem. It is true, Alpha, the male elder Kale said, his voice raspy like dry leaves. He couldn't take his eyes off Arya. The bond is real. I have not felt one so strong in my lifetime. Alara stepped forward, her gaze full of a sad, profound awe. The lost bloodline. The prophecies spoke of a star-caller returning when the shadows grew longest. We thought it was just a myth. Star-caller? Lost bloodline? The words were meaningless static in the roar of Arya's confusion. Her dream of Port Blossom, of a quiet, simple life, crumbled into dust. She was no longer Arya the cleaner. She was no longer Arya the orphan. She was a prophecy. She was his. It was too much. Jax's attention never left her. The bond is faded. It is absolute, he stated, his words leaving no room for argument. She is my mate, which meant she is now a member of this pack, with the full status and protection that entails. He looked at her, his expression softening just a fraction. You are safe here, Arya. I swear it. Safe? How could she be safe when her entire life had just been detonated? She was a wolf, a fated mate, a star-caller? She had a terrible feeling that the danger from the Nightshade pack she'd overheard Seraphina talking about was now, somehow, her danger too. You will no longer stay in the servants' quarters, Jax continued, his tone once again that of an alpha giving an order. Your things will be moved to the alpha's wing, to the Luna's suite, immediately. Luna. The alpha's mate. The word hung in the air, impossibly heavy. That's why Seraphina had looked at her with such hatred. Seraphina had wanted to be Luna. Arya had just stolen her entire future without even knowing it. Before she could protest, before she could form a single coherent thought, Alara was gently guiding her out of the study. She moved in a daze, her feet shuffling on the marble floors she had polished just hours before. They led her to a part of the house she had never been allowed to enter, to a set of grand carved doors. Alara opened them, revealing a suite so luxurious it made the rest of the grand house look like a cottage. A massive bed, a private balcony overlooking the forest, silks and furs draped over elegant furniture. This is your home now, child, Alara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Then, she was gone. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing the final, brutal closing of a door on her old life. She was completely, utterly alone. Alone in a gilded cage, with the soul of a wolf she didn't know, a destiny she didn't want, and the mark of an alpha she barely understood. Her reflection in a floor-to-ceiling mirror showed a terrified girl with silver eyes, drowning in a room and a life that were not her own. Sleep was a shallow, restless thing, and when Arya woke, it was to the unfamiliar weight of silk sheets against her skin. For a disorienting moment, she was nobody, just a girl in a bed too soft, in a room too quiet. Then, it all came crashing back. The fire, the shattering glass, the silver in her eyes, and his voice. Mine. The word was a brand on her soul. Her old life, the one where she was an invisible cleaner with a secret dream of escape, was a ghost. And she was the one haunting this new, terrifying reality. She had to go down there to the communal breakfast, because hiding would only prove she was the coward they all thought she was. As the silence stretched, she forced herself out of bed, finding clothes laid out for her that were softer and finer than anything she had ever touched. They felt like a costume, a lie. Walking out of the Luna's suite was like stepping off a cliff. Every head in the dining hall turned. The lively chatter died into a chorus of hushed, speculative whispers. The space between them burned with 100 questions she couldn't answer. She saw it all: curiosity, resentment, and, in the eyes of Serafina, a cold, calculated hatred that promised retribution. Arya's goal was simple: get a piece of toast, find a corner, and survive. But then, Serafina's voice, sharp as broken glass, cut through the silence. Well, look what crawled out of the Alpha's den, she said, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. Tell me, cleaner, do you even know which fork to use, or do you plan on licking the plate clean? Old habits die hard, I suppose. The insult landed, and a flush of hot shame crawled up Arya's neck. Her voice, when she found it, was a trembling whisper. I was just hungry. Hungry? Serafina laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You're a stray who's been given a seat at the king's table. You should be grateful, not greedy. Before the words left her lips, a low, dangerous sound rumbled through the hall. A growl. It came from the head of the table, where Jack sat, watching, his expression unreadable until now. The air thickened. Time stood still. That's enough, Serafina. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the tension with the finality of a blade. Every wolf in the room, including Serafina, flinched, their gazes dropping in submission. Under the weight of his stare, Serafina's smirk faltered. Alpha, I know what you were doing, he interrupted, his golden eyes locking onto Arya. Arya is my mate. She is your Luna. You will address her with the respect that title demands. Or you will address me. The threat was unspoken, but it hung in the air, heavy and lethal. With a single glance, he had defended her, claimed her, and declared her status to the entire pack. But in doing so, he hadn't just earned her a measure of respect, he had painted a fresh, unmissable target on her back. As her wolf stirred with a strange sense of pride, the human girl inside her trembled with fear. Jack stood, his chair scraping against the stone floor. Arya, with me. Your training begins now. In the quiet of the forest, away from the suffocating judgment of the pack house, Arya could finally breathe. The scent of damp earth and pine needles was a soothing balm on her frayed nerves. Yet, the power thrumming just beneath her skin was anything but calm. It was a wild, unpredictable current, and Jax had brought her here to learn how to swim in it. Your senses are new, he explained, his voice softer here than it had been in the hall. Stronger. Don't fight them. Just let them in. Tell me what you hear. She closed her eyes, trying to focus. At first, it was a wall of noise, but then she let her instincts take over. As if fate demanded it, the sounds began to separate. The frantic flutter of a robin's wings in a branch overhead, the scuttling of a beetle under a distant log, the steady, powerful beat of Jax's heart just a few feet away from her. "I can hear everything," she whispered, her eyes flying open in shock. A rare, small smile touched his lips. "Good. That's the beginning." From there, he walked her through the basics of her new existence, teaching her to harness her heightened senses, to feel the shift in the wind, to recognize the tracks of animals. But when he asked her to reach for the power inside her, the hum she'd felt at the festival, things went wrong. She tried. She reached deep inside, to that trembling, melodic core. But her fear, her feeling of being an imposter, was a wall of ice. "I can't." "Yes, you can," he insisted, his voice a low murmur. "Don't think, just feel. Feel the life in this forest. Feel the connection between us." She focused on the steady presence beside her, on the bond that pulsed between them like a living thing. She let go. What followed was not a trickle of power, but a flood. A wave of untamed energy burst from her, and the patch of faded bluebells at her feet erupted into a vibrant, impossible bloom of deep violet. It was beautiful, breathtaking. But a moment later, as a spike of fear shot through her at the display of raw power, they withered and turned to dust. Her heart skipped. I killed them." "No," Jax said, his voice filled with a strange awe as he knelt to touch the ashes. "You didn't kill them, Arya. You gave them a whole lifetime in a single second." He looked up at her, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that had nothing to do with anger. "This power. I've never seen anything like it. The legends called it the creation song." Between one breath and the next, he told her the story her blood remembered but her mind had forgotten. He spoke of an ancient, powerful lineage of wolves known as the Starcallers, wolves who could command life itself. A lineage thought to have been hunted to extinction centuries ago by an ancient enemy who fed on darkness. As the truth unraveled, Arya felt the weight of a destiny she never asked for settle on her shoulders. She wasn't just a werewolf. She was a relic, a weapon. And deep down, she knew the truth. That ancient enemy, the one who hunted her ancestors, they were still out there. And now, they would be hunting her too. Jax insisted she accompany him on the evening patrol. To get a feel for the territory, he'd said, to understand its borders. But she knew the real reason. After what he'd told her about the Starcallers, he wouldn't let her out of his sight. The sun bled orange and purple through the canopy as they moved, two of his most trusted warriors, Galen and Kira, flanking them in silence. For a while, there was peace. For a while, Arya almost felt like she belonged. But then, the wind shifted. It carried a scent that made the fur on her arms stand on end. Something acrid, unnatural, and wrong. It was the smell of corrupted magic. Without warning, they burst from the trees. Shadows with teeth and claws. 5 of them. They moved too fast, their limbs jerking with an unnatural strength, their eyes glowing with a faint, sickening violet light. These weren't just wolves. They were puppets. Before either could speak, the fight was on. Jax and his warriors shifted in a blur of motion, 3 massive wolves of the Blackwood pack meeting the attackers with brutal force. But the corrupted wolves felt no pain. They fought with a silent, relentless fury that was terrifying to behold. Arya stumbled back, her heart pounding in her throat, a scream trapped behind her teeth. As the chaos raged, a new figure stepped calmly from the shadows. He was tall and handsome, with a cruel, charismatic smile that didn't reach his eyes. His own eyes held that same violet taint, but brighter, more intelligent. This was their master. "Well, well," he said, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr that cut through the sounds of the fight. "I was hoping I'd find you, the little lost Starcaller." Jax, in his wolf form, let out a warning growl that shook the very ground, placing his massive body between Arya and the newcomer. The man just chuckled, completely unafraid. "Easy, Blackwood. I am Gideon Nightshade, and I have no quarrel with you. I am merely here to collect what is mine." His gaze locked onto Arya, hungry and possessive. "My queen has waited a very long time for her return. She will be so pleased." "Queen?" His words made no sense, but the predatory intent behind them was crystal clear. As Gideon took a step toward her, something inside her snapped. The tension broke. Her wolf pressed forward. It wasn't a choice. It was pure, primal instinct. A wave of raw, untamed power, the creation song, erupted from her, a silent scream of defiance. It slammed into Gideon and his wolves, not with force, but with a surge of pure, overwhelming life that made the corrupted magic within them recoil. The attackers staggered back, momentarily stunned. The opening was all Jax needed. With a furious roar, he and his warriors pressed their advantage, driving the corrupted wolves back into the darkening woods. Gideon retreated, but his smile never faltered. His chilling laughter echoed through the trees. "This changes nothing, Starcaller. Run back to your alpha. Hide in his shadow. I will have you. And when I do, you will sing a new song for my queen. A song of beautiful, endless darkness." They returned to the pack house not as victors, but as survivors carrying a plague of unanswered questions. The unnatural scent of Gideon's corrupted wolves clung to them, a phantom stench that made the other pack members recoil. In the aftermath, a tense, fearful quiet settled over the pack. More importantly, it settled inside Arya. Gideon's words echoed in her mind, a venomous loop. "My queen, you will sing a song of darkness." The memory of his hungry, violet-tainted eyes made her power. The beautiful, terrifying creation song retreat deep inside her, hiding like a frightened animal. Days turned into a week of frustrating, fruitless effort. Jax and the elders spent hours poring over ancient, crumbling scrolls in the Alpha's library, searching for any mention of a Starcaller's queen. Meanwhile, Jax would take her to the training grounds, his jaw tight with a frustration that mirrored her own. "Just like before, Arya," he'd say, his voice strained with forced patience. "Reach for it. Feel the life around you." But she couldn't. Her power refused to answer, because every time she reached for it, the memory of Gideon's threat made her flinch. She was afraid of her own song. What if he was right? What if she could be twisted into a weapon for this mysterious, shadowy queen? The failure was a cold, heavy stone in her stomach. A stone that confirmed her deepest fear. She was a liability, a danger to the only home she'd ever known. To make things worse, Seraphina saw her weakness and seized upon it. She didn't challenge Arya with open insults anymore. Instead, her attacks were more subtle, more poisonous. She spread whispers. "Have you seen the Luna train?" she'd murmur to a group of warriors, just loud enough for Arya to overhear. "The Alpha spends all his time with her, yet she can't even summon a spark. Our enemies are gathering, and our leader is distracted by a powerless human who pretends to be a wolf." The words were poison-tipped darts, and they found their mark every time. The pack's stares shifted from awe and curiosity to doubt and fear. Truth be told, Arya couldn't even blame them. They were right. What good was a prophesied savior who was too scared to save herself? That night, she found Jax in the library, a massive, leather-bound tome open before him. He looked exhausted, the lines of stress around his eyes deeper than ever. "Any luck?" she asked, her voice small in the vast, silent room. He shook his head, rubbing his temples. "It's all fragmented. Legends, warnings. There are endless mentions of the Starcaller's power, and their ancient enemy." He pointed a finger at a faded, spidery script. "A being of consumption, a witch of the void. Her name was Lyra." Lyra. The name felt like a shard of ice in her veins. Before she could ask another question, a sound shattered the night's quiet. The deep, resonant cry of the pack's alarm horn, a sound reserved only for a direct, full-scale assault on their territory. The whispers were over. The enemy was at the gates. Chaos erupted. The alarm horn was a frantic heartbeat echoing through the territory. Warriors scrambled, their movements a blur of grim purpose. The air, once still, now tasted of ozone and impending violence. Arya's own heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of pure, unadulterated terror. This wasn't a small patrol being ambushed. This was an invasion. Jax was by her side in an instant, his transformation from weary scholar to alpha warrior breathtakingly fast. "Stay inside the house, you understand," he commanded, his golden eyes blazing with protective fury. "No matter what you hear, you do not leave." But then, a chilling, familiar voice echoed from outside, magically amplified to carry across the grounds. Gideon's. "I have no desire to slaughter your entire pack, Blackwood. Give me the Star Collar, and I will leave you to your miserable patch of dirt." The pack's answering snarls were a wave of defiance, but Arya felt a cold dread wash over her. This was her fault. They were here for her. Without thinking, she ran to the large bay window overlooking the main lawn, and what she saw stole her breath. It wasn't just a dozen corrupted wolves, it was an army, at least 50 of them, moving with a coordinated, unnatural precision, and in the center stood Gideon, a smirk on his face. The battle that followed was brutal and swift. The Blackwood warriors fought with the desperate courage of wolves defending their home, but they were outnumbered. As Arya watched in horror, Gideon and a small group of his strongest thralls broke through the defensive line, heading straight for the pack house. Straight for her. She stumbled backward as the front doors splintered inward. Gideon stepped through the wreckage, his eyes locking on her. "There you are." He lunged, but then in the span of a breath, he froze mid-stride. His eyes, they went blank. Empty. The temperature in the grand hall plummeted, and the roaring sounds of battle outside faded into a muffled, distant hum. A new voice. A voice like scraped stone and dying stars echoed not in the clearing, but inside her head. So this is the vessel. Frail. Frightened. Pathetic. The air shimmered around Gideon, and a shadowy, ethereal form, barely humanoid, made of sucking darkness and cold rage, manifested behind him, its ghostly arms wrapped around him like a puppeteer. This was the Queen. This was Lyra. "You think this is about him?" Lyra's voice whispered in her mind, a violation that made her soul scream. "You think this is about packs and territory? You are a key, little wolf. A key I will use to unlock the door between worlds. Your precious creation song will be the scream that tears the veil, and my army of the void will pour through to finally bring silence to this noisy, pointless world." A vision flooded Arya's mind. Not a memory, but a horrifying promise. She saw skies of bleeding purple, lands turned to gray ash, and a tide of shadowy creatures consuming everything, all while she floated above, her body a gateway of screaming, corrupted energy. A conduit for the end of everything. This wasn't a war. It was an apocalypse. As if sensing the cosmic horror of the moment, Jax burst back into the hall, a whirlwind of fury. He slammed into Gideon, the sheer force of his impact shattering the connection. Lyra's shadowy form dissolved with a faint, hissing shriek, but not before one of her ethereal tendrils lashed out and touched Arya's arm. The touch was colder than death, a searing, unnatural cold that burned deep into her flesh. The battle was over almost as soon as it began. With Lyra's connection broken, the corrupted wolves faltered, and the Blackwood warriors, fueled by righteous fury, drove them back into the forest. But there was no victory in the air, only the heavy, suffocating silence of dread. They had survived, but they had seen the face of their true enemy, and it was a face of absolute annihilation. Arya barely registered the pack members tending to their wounds. Her entire world was focused on the point of contact on her arm. A spiderweb of black, creeping veins spread from the spot Lyra had touched, a void scar that pulsed with a cold, dead energy. The hum of the creation song inside her, it was gone. Silenced. Replaced by a terrifying, empty quiet. Jax was at her side, his hands hovering over her arm, afraid to touch the corrupted flesh. "What did she do to you?" he asked, his voice raw with a fear she had never heard from him before. She's a witch," Arya stammered. The vision of the apocalypse burned into her mind. "A void witch. She wants to use me. My power. To destroy everything." In the quiet that followed, Kale and Alara approached, their faces pale. "Lyra," Kale whispered, his eyes wide with dawning horror. The scrolls were right. Alara gently examined Arya's arm, her touch surprisingly steady. "This is void magic. It is a poison to a Starcaller's soul. It will drain her, silence her song, and eventually consume her." Arya's blood ran cold. Was she dying? "There must be a way to fight it," Jax growled, his gaze snapping to the elders. "Tell me." Alara looked from Arya to Jax, her expression full of a sorrowful weight. "The texts speak of only one defense against the void, one power strong enough to purify its taint." She paused, her voice dropping. "A perfected soul bond." Kyle nodded grimly. "It is not a bond of duty. It is not a bond of fate. It is a bond of absolute, soul-deep truth. An alpha and his Starcaller mate must be completely and utterly unified. No secrets, no walls, no fear between them. Their souls must beat as one. Only then can the creation song be amplified to its full potential, strong enough to push back the void." The room fell silent. Arya looked at Jax, and for the first time, she saw past the powerful, commanding alpha. She saw a man haunted by his own past, a leader who used control as a shield. She remembered hearing stories of how his father, the previous alpha, had failed the pack through emotional weakness, a failure that had cost lives and left a scar on Jax's soul. He had built walls of iron around his heart to be the strong leader his father wasn't. And now, to save her, to save the world, he had to tear them all down. And she, the girl who had never believed herself worthy of anything, had to believe she was worthy of a love so perfect it could defy the end of the world. The battle ahead wasn't just against an army of shadows. It was against the ghosts inside themselves. That night, the air between them was different. The Alpha's suite, once a gilded cage, now felt like a sanctuary built for two. The easy, unspoken trust between them had become the very foundation of their new reality. Jax didn't lead their training sessions with orders anymore. Instead, he led with questions, and she answered with truths. "My father, he was a good alpha," Jax began, his voice low and strained as he spoke of a past he never shared. They were seated on a bearskin rug before a low-burning fire, the void scar on Arya's arm a constant, cold reminder of the stakes. But he was too emotional. He let a rival alpha's lies get to him because he cared too much for his people. It led to a terrible ambush. We lost 10 good wolves. He stared into the fire, his jaw tight. "I swore I would never be weak like that. I built my walls because of that. Because emotions, they get people killed." And she understood. Her name hung in the air, a silent question. She knew the truth. She had to answer in kind. She swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "I was an orphan, and to them, to the pack, I was never a person." She paused, her voice trembling. "My worth was always measured by how clean the floors were. I believed if I wasn't useful, I was nothing. Because that was all I was ever told." They stared at each other, not as Alpha and Luna, but as two wounded souls finally seeing the truth of the other. The weight of Jax's trauma and the hollowness of her neglect were two sides of the same coin. He reached out and gently took her hand, his fingers tracing the cold, black veins of the void scar on her arm. His touch was warm and steady. A low hum started in her bones. The creation song. It wasn't a scream of power, but a melody of hope, quiet and pure. With every heartbeat, as they sat there and simply were together, something inside her shifted. The warmth of his hand, the shared truths, the silent understanding. It all fed the song inside her. Her spirit felt full for the first time in her life. She felt it, clear as day, a faint silver light blooming beneath the black mark. As the bond pulsed between them, the creeping void scar began to retreat, shrinking just a fraction, the black fading to a faint gray. It was happening. Their bond, their connection was the cure. It was their salvation. The next morning, the void scar on Arya's arm was almost gone, a faint silvery line against her skin. Their bond had worked. They had found the path. But then, as Jax led her into the pack's main hall, the air was suddenly thick with an unnatural cold that made the hair on her arms stand on end. She felt it first in her mind, a whisper like 1,000 tiny needles, a voice full of freezing, desolate malice. Lyra, you think you can resist me? A tiny spark against an eternal void? A vision flooded Arya's mind, not of the past, but of a horrifying possibility. She saw Jax, his body covered in black veins, his golden eyes turned to empty violet pits. She saw the pack house, its inhabitants frozen in stone, their screams silenced by a cold that ate away at their souls. This was what Lyra would do. This was her victory. A silent, unmoving world. She was trying to poison the bond, to plant seeds of fear and doubt. But Arya felt Jax's presence, his hand on the small of her back, a solid and real presence that cut through the illusion. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back with every ounce of her will. Just like that, the vision shattered. But the attack was not over. A furious alarm bell began to ring from the direction of the nearby human town. A scout, his face pale with terror, ran into the hall. Alpha! A raiding party! From the Nightshade Pack! They're attacking the town! No, they're just destroying it. Everything. They're not taking anything. Jax's face tightened with cold fury. He knew what this was. She knew too. Gideon wasn't taking territory. He was sending a message. An act of pure, unadulterated cruelty. He was attacking the innocent humans, because he knew they were the one thing Arya cared for besides her pack. He was punishing her. The fury that propelled Arya was cold and clear. She was no longer just running from the void. She was running to protect. The horror of the vision, the innocent lives now at risk. It all solidified her resolve. She looked at Jax, her silver eyes hard and steady. We can't wait for them to come to us anymore, she said, her voice trembling with emotion but unwavering in its intent. They are punishing us. Punishing me. We have to stop them. We have to go to them. Jax's gaze was equally intense. He looked at the girl who had once been a frightened cleaner, and he saw a queen. A true alpha. Arya, he said, his voice a low growl. You're right. They had reached the point of no return. They were no longer running. They were hunting. The elders listened to their plan with grim faces. Kale unrolled another ancient scroll, his gnarled finger tracing a faded map. The Nightshades have a stronghold, Alpha. It is the place where the Starcallers made their last stand, a convergence point of power where the veil between our world and the spirit realm is thin. A place where Lyra could be truly vulnerable. As if fate demanded it, the final confrontation had a location and a name. This was the end. It was all or nothing. To make things worse, they knew Gideon would be waiting for them. It was a perfect trap. But it was also their only chance. We'll take our strongest warriors, Jax said, his tone resolute, an alpha laying out a battle plan. We will engage their main force. Arya will be with me. And you will not fight, Alara added, her voice soft but firm. You will do the work of the soul. You will perfect the bond. It is the only thing that can stand against the void. The space between Jax and Arya burned with a silent understanding. All the training, all the shared vulnerability, all the healing. It had led to this. The last step. The final act of faith. The elders left them, giving them the privacy they would need. Arya, Jack said, his voice low. "Are you ready?" She didn't answer with words. Instead, she took his hand, tracing the lines of his scarred knuckles, feeling the warmth of his skin, and feeling their bond thrumming between them like a living thing. She moved into his arms, her head resting on his chest, listening to the powerful, steady beat of his heart. It was a rhythm she knew she would follow anywhere. He held her close, his arms a strong, safe harbor. His voice, when he spoke, was a low murmur against her hair. "We have to finish it. We have to complete the bond, all the way." A simple nod. She looked up at him, her silver eyes filled with a love so profound it hurt. This wasn't about sex. This was a physical, spiritual, and emotional completion. It was the fusion of two souls, their last, desperate, beautiful hope. He lowered his head and kissed her, his lips soft at first, then demanding. The kiss deepened, becoming a tender, fierce exchange of 1,000 unspoken fears and 1,000,000 silent promises. Her body answered him, her heart beating in unison with his. As if the world narrowed, it was only the two of them, two damaged souls, two halves of a greater whole, coming together in a final, defiant act of love. They were ready. And just like that, the bond was complete. The mark on her arm vanished, her skin feeling as though it were cleansed by moonlight. And for the first time, the creation song sang not just within her, but around her, a melody of pure light and life. The song was complete, and so were they. The air at the convergence point was impossibly still. It held its breath. The moment they stepped into the ancient clearing, with its massive, moss-covered stones standing like forgotten teeth in the earth, Arya felt a terrifying absence. Her creation song, so loud and vibrant just hours before, went silent. The profound sense of life she'd felt in the forest was gone, replaced by a cold, aching emptiness. It was the void, and it was waiting. As if summoned, they appeared. Not the small raiding party from before, but an army of corrupted wolves, their numbers stretching back into the shadows. Their glowing violet eyes were like 1,000 tiny stars of pure hate. But then, to make things worse, Gideon Nightshade stepped into the center. His grin was a cruel slash across his face. He wasn't a commander. He was a puppeteer. "Welcome, Starcaller," he said, his voice a low, chilling purr. "I was wondering when you'd arrive. You and your little toy soldier." Jax's growl was low and threatening, but Gideon just laughed. "Did you really think I wouldn't feel the surge of power from your pathetic little bond? I knew the ritual would bring you out. You've walked directly into our home." The planned ritual to weaken Lyra failed. Instead, the ground trembled, and thick, inky darkness, a manifestation of the void, bled from the moss-covered stones. It was a trap, a well-laid, final trap. Jax's commands were short and sharp, but his warriors were already outmatched. The corrupted wolves, fueled by the void's cold fury, fought without pain, their movements unnaturally fast and brutal. The battle was utter, complete chaos. In the midst of the carnage, Gideon moved with a singular purpose. He bypassed the fighting, heading straight for Jax. "You will get in my way no more, Alpha," he snarled. Their fight was a cataclysm. Two alphas of immense power colliding in a storm of fur and teeth. It was a battle of will, of fury, and of pure physical dominance. And it was all a distraction. As the battle raged, pulling Jax and his warriors away from her, Arya felt the bond stretch thin, a living wire pulled taut and humming with strain. Lyra's whisper was back in her mind, triumphant and cold. The moment Gideon slammed into Jax, a dark, consuming hunger surged toward Arya. She was exposed. She stumbled back, trying to use her creation song, but her hands felt like dead wood. It was useless. She was surrounded by the void's presence, and it was suffocating her power. From the corner of her eye, she saw Seraphina. The hostile she-wolf who had so hated her was fighting with a fierce, reckless abandon. She saw Arya trapped, helpless, a wolf who couldn't fight. A growl rose in Seraphina's throat, a growl of frustration. of fury, but not at Arya, at the enemies surrounding her. Without warning, Serafina launched herself forward, not at an enemy, but at Arya. She shoved her hard, pushing her out of the path of a lunging, corrupted wolf. "Run, you coward!" she screamed, her eyes blazing with an intense, complicated mixture of rage and desperation. But then, as the corrupted wolf turned on her, a chilling look of defiance and sacrifice settled on Serafina's face. "Arluna!" she gasped, the word filled with a shocking, final acceptance as the void creature's jaws closed around her throat. Serafina's life ended in a flash of sound and fury, a single bright act of defiance. But it wasn't enough. It only bought Arya a few seconds. A single beat later, the air grew colder. Shadows coalesced from the corners of the clearing, dark, fluid shapes with no form and no substance, and they surrounded her. They didn't bite. They didn't growl. They simply absorbed. They passed through her skin like freezing water, like a silent, endless scream, pulling at her spirit, her song, her very self. She felt the sharp, disorienting tear as her consciousness was ripped from her body. Her wolf whimpered in silent protest. Her body went limp, a hollow vessel for the darkness that swirled around it. Lyra's victory was absolute. In the physical world, Jax's roar of triumph turned to a cry of pure, soul-crushing agony as he saw her fall, her essence being drawn into the heart of the void. She was falling. It wasn't a physical sensation, but a plunge into an endless, suffocating darkness. There was no sound, no light, no feeling. Only the chilling cold of the void and a single, malevolent presence. Lyra's. Foolish little songbird, Lyra's voice echoed in the desolate space, a whisper that tasted of ash. You fought so hard to become something, but you were never more than a ghost, a forgotten fragment. This is your home, little one. The quiet, the empty, the nothingness you were always destined for. The visions began. They weren't a promise of the future this time. They were memories of the past, twisted and weaponized. She saw herself as a little girl, alone in the pack house, watching other children play. She saw Serafina's sneer, heard her venomous laughter. She saw the mop in her hand, the polish on her knees, the dirt of 100 footsteps on her floors. She was just a cleaner, a tool, a means to an end. Lyra's voice continued, a parasite feeding on her deepest wound. Your powerful alpha, he didn't see you until your power flared. He didn't love you until your soul became useful to him. He loved the star caller, not the orphan cleaner. This bond of yours? It is a lie. A beautiful, fragile lie. Her chest ached. It hurt because a part of her, a tiny, terrified part of her that she had tried to silence, believed every word. Maybe Lyra was right. Maybe Jax loved the prophecy, not the person. Maybe she had just traded one form of servitude for another. The creation song inside her, which had been a vibrant river of life, was now a stagnant puddle. It was silent. She tried to reach for it to find the humming warmth of Jax's presence, but there was nothing. Just cold, consuming darkness. She was worthless. She was a lie. She was nothing. The truth was a physical weight on her soul. She was just a lonely girl in a world that never truly wanted her, and now she was lost forever. In the physical world, Jax, his body broken and bleeding, finally defeated Gideon. But the victory meant nothing. He roared her name, a desperate, guttural plea that shook the very earth, but it was too late. All he saw was her limp, motionless body being drawn into the heart of a swirling, ravenous void pit, the gateway to an eternity of emptiness. His love, his power, his courage. It had all failed. She was gone. In the crushing, eternal silence of the void, Arya drifted. She was nothing, a forgotten thought, a speck of dust in an endless, hungry darkness. Lyra's victory was absolute, her whispers of worthlessness the only truth left in the universe. Orphan, cleaner, Mistake. You were never meant for the song. You were meant for the silence. And Arya, exhausted and broken, believed her. What was the point of fighting? She let herself sink, ready for the final, quiet end. But then, a sound. Faint, rhythmic, a soft, persistent thump-thump that was not part of the void's silence. It was a sound of life in a realm of death. At first, she thought it was a memory, but it was too steady, too real. It was a heartbeat, not her own. Her heart felt like a frozen stone in her chest. Deep down, she knew the truth. It was his. It was Jax's heartbeat, a desperate, loving rhythm reaching for her across their perfected bond, a lifeline of pure devotion cast into an ocean of despair. Thump-thump, a promise. Thump-thump, a refusal to let go. Lyra's voice hissed, trying to drown it out. An illusion, a fleeting echo of a foolish, mortal emotion. It cannot save you. But it wasn't just the heartbeat anymore. Other sounds joined it. Whispers, not of the void, but of starlight and ancient forests. The voices of her ancestors, the star callers before her, rising from the echoes of her own blood. The song is not the power, little one, they seemed to murmur. The song is the vessel. The love. The love is the power. In that moment, her world tilted. A profound, earth-shattering realization bloomed in the darkness. Her worth wasn't in the song because the song was just a tool, a gift. Her worth wasn't in being a prophecy or a Luna or a warrior. Her worth was in her capacity to love. A love so strong it could cross the barrier between worlds. A love that Jax felt. A love he was returning with every beat of his heart. She was not worthy because she was powerful. She was powerful because she was worthy of love. As if fate demanded it, she focused on that distant, steady rhythm. She gathered the last shattered fragments of her spirit, and from the depths of the void, a single pure note of the creation song, weak but utterly beautifully defiant, sounded in the darkness. The single note of her song, a tiny spark of life in the oppressive emptiness, made Lyra recoil with a mental shriek of pure rage. No! You will be silent! You will be nothing! But Arya wasn't listening anymore. The truth had unraveled, and with it came a new, desperate kind of clarity. She couldn't fight a void. You can't punch a hole. You can't kill an emptiness. You can only do one thing. You can fill it. Her instincts surged. Her plan, born of desperation and a love that defied oblivion, was terrifyingly simple. She would not fight Lyra's darkness with light. She would flood the void with so much life, so much creation, so much song, that it would choke on the sheer volume of it. She would pour everything she was into the emptiness until it shattered from the inside out. In the physical world, Jax felt her spark of defiance through their bond. He was on his knees, battered and bleeding, but her note of hope was a jolt to his soul. A second later, he felt her intent, the sheer beautiful insanity of her plan. His heart skipped. It was a suicide mission. She was going to burn herself out, to pour her own life force into the void. And he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he would not let her do it alone. He staggered to his feet, his body screaming in protest. He looked at the few remaining Blackwood warriors, their faces grim, their bodies bruised. "Buy her time!" he roared, his alpha voice ringing with a power that came not from command, but from pure, desperate love. "Hold the line, no matter what. Give your Luna time." Without another word, he began to move, a force of nature driven by a singular purpose. He had to get to her. He had to be her anchor. He had to pour his own strength into her, to feed her song with his own life force. He fought through the remaining corrupted wolves, a blur of black fur and righteous fury, his eyes fixed on the swirling, ravenous vortex of the void pit where Arya's physical body was slowly being consumed. He had to reach her. He was the only one who could. As the silence roared, Arya began to sing. From within the heart of the void, she sang not a song of battle, but a song of life itself. She sang of the feeling of cool grass under bare feet. She sang of the taste of the first summer strawberry. She sang of the warmth of a fire on a cold winter's night. She sang of the deep, steady beat of Jax's heart. With every note, she poured her memories, her emotions, her very soul into the darkness. The void shuddered, unable to process the onslaught of pure, vibrant creation. Lyra's mental attacks became frantic, showing her visions of Jax dying, of the pack failing, of her song turning to ash. But Arya clung to the truth of their bond, a lifeline in the storm. She could feel him. Through the bond, she felt his pain, his exhaustion, his desperate, unwavering push to reach her. His struggle became a verse in her song. His love became its chorus. The air thickened. As if the forest watched, the ancient stones of the clearing began to glow with a soft silver light, resonating with her song. In the physical world, Jax finally broke through the last of the corrupted wolves. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his body pushed to its absolute limit, but his eyes burned with a golden fire that defied the darkness. He reached the edge of the void pit, just as Arya's physical body was about to be pulled in completely. Without hesitation, he plunged his hands into the swirling vortex of shadows, his fingers finding the fabric of her dress. He grabbed hold, anchoring her to the world of the living. The moment he touched her, the bond between them exploded. It was no longer a distant heartbeat, it was a supernova. He became a conduit, a channel for all his alpha strength, his unwavering will, and his boundless love. He poured it all into her, not holding anything back. She felt it, clear as day. His strength surged into her, amplifying her song 1,000 times over. It was no longer just her melody. It was their symphony, the song of their united souls. The void pit began to violently destabilize, unable to contain the paradoxical, overwhelming force of pure, unconditional love. Her song reached its crescendo, a note of impossible, beautiful power that promised either salvation or total annihilation. The creation song reached its absolute crescendo. It wasn't a melody of notes anymore, but a symphony of life itself, a brilliant, impossible sound made of starlight, fire, and the undeniable force of their shared love. Within the void, Arya poured every last drop of herself into it. She felt Lyra's essence, ancient and terrible, recoil from the onslaught, a cold scream of agony that was the ultimate paradox, nothingness being destroyed by everything. The void pit, unable to contain the sheer beautiful force, began to implode. It collapsed inward, a black hole swallowing itself. But this final act of creation came at a brutal, terrifying cost. She felt it, clear as day. Her body, it was a fragile vessel, and the power was too immense to hold. Her bones felt like they were shattering into 1,000,000 pieces. Her skin felt like it was ripping apart. It was like dying 1,000 times over in a single moment, a searing, white-hot pain that threatened to consume her. Jax's voice, a scream through their bond, was her only anchor. Arya. She focused on him. His love, his unwavering presence. It was the life raft in the storm. The final note of her song was an act of pure will, a last desperate push of a love that defied oblivion. A brilliant, silent, soul-purifying explosion of light erupted from the void pit, a flash of silver that cleansed the entire clearing, turning the remaining corrupted wolves to harmless dust. And then, the light was gone. The song was gone. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying, and final. Her body, drained of all its life force, fell limp in Jax's arms. The battle was won. But to win, she had lost everything. The last thing she felt was the crushing weight of his grief, a wave of despair that washed over her as his cry of agony was torn from his throat. She was falling again, but this time it was a gentle descent into a comforting darkness. It wasn't the void. This darkness was warm, safe, and filled with a low, constant vibration. It was the sound of Jax's pain, his grief, his love, She could feel his hands on her, holding her so tight her bones should have ached, but she felt nothing. "No, I won't let you." His voice was a whisper in the silent place. Not in her ears, but in her soul. "You are mine. I am yours. You come back to me, Arya." She was too tired. She just wanted to rest. But then, a soft golden light began to pulse around her. It was him. Through their perfected bond, he was pouring his own life force into her, mending her soul with his love. The pain from her body being shattered was gone, replaced by a warm, golden wave of comfort. Her wounds, both physical and spiritual, were being knitted back together by his will. It was his turn to be the Starcaller, his turn to be the healer. She felt it. The slow, gentle pull back to life. A single tear, hot and real, escaped her closed eye. She felt the warmth of his cheek against hers, the shuddering breaths he took. She could hear his heart, a frantic, desperate rhythm that told a story of devotion. She wasn't a prophecy. She wasn't a tool. She was a person, a woman, a mate. And she was loved. She had to come back. For him. For them. With a gasp that tore from her chest, her eyes flew open. She was back. She was alive. A beat later, she was staring up into Jax's face. His golden eyes were red and raw with unshed tears. But when they looked at her, they filled with a dawning hope, a radiant, soul-deep joy that made her want to weep with relief. He pulled her into a fierce, shuddering embrace, burying his face in her hair. She held on, her hands gripping the back of his shirt as if she were a drowning woman, holding on to the only solid ground in the world. Weeks later, a new kind of silence had settled over the Blackwood pack. It was a silence not of fear, but of profound, lasting peace. The void was gone. Gideon and his pack were no more. The Starcaller prophecy was fulfilled, and the world was saved. The mark on Arya's arm was gone, the last trace of the void's touch completely healed by their bond. But the scar on her soul was gone too. She no longer felt like a ghost haunting the hallways. She was a living, breathing part of the world she had saved. She was a Luna, and her strength came not from power, but from her empathy, her resilience, and the love she found with her mate. She felt it, clear as day. Her worth was not defined by her usefulness, but by her heart. On a sun-drenched afternoon, she stood beside Jax, addressing a great council of alphas from packs all over the region. They weren't just Blackwood Pack anymore. They were a coalition of the saved. Their expressions were not of judgment, but of awe. Jax introduced her not as his mate or his Luna, but as their greatest leader. And when she spoke, her voice was not the small, trembling thing it used to be. It was strong and steady, filled with a newfound wisdom. She told them that the void was a real enemy, but so was the bitterness of ancient feuds and the selfishness of alphas. She told them that their new era would not be built on territory, but on unity. Not on fear, but on hope. The very heart of her message was simple. She, a girl who used to clean floors, knew that a person's worth was determined by a willingness to sacrifice and serve, the lesson of her entire life. As the meeting concluded, a sense of peace settled on her heart. She was a queen in her own right, but a different kind. Her crown was not of gold, but of an unbreakable love. 6 months later, the territory was lush with summer life. Arya found Jax on their private balcony, his face turned toward the setting sun. He was looking out over the packlands, peaceful and thriving, a testament to their victory. She came up behind him, her hands wrapping around his waist, her head resting against his back. He leaned into her touch, a low, contented purr rumbling in his chest. Her heart fluttered. She took his hand and placed it on her flat stomach. He tensed, confused for a moment until he felt a tiny, impossible flutter of life beneath his palm. He looked at her, his golden eyes wide with stunned, joyous disbelief. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She just smiled, a smile so full of love and hope it hurt to hold it in. "A new song," she said, her silver eyes shining. And for the first time in his life, Jax Blackwood, the dominant alpha who had seen so much darkness, felt a powerful, healing love that was not earned but simply given. It was not a prophecy. It was a promise. It was everything.